In the year of our Lord 1632, the skies over The Hague lay low and colorless, as if stained with old milk and soot. Beneath them, Anthony Clessoon van der Meulen arrived by carriage, wrapped in a coat too thin for the season, with his paint crates clattering in the hold like bones in a box. The driver, a man whose mouth had stitched itself shut with suspicion, spoke not a word from Delft to the city gates, and offered only a nod before turning his horse back into the mist. The painter stood alone now, newly summoned, oddly chosen, and not entirely willing. Van der Meulen was not a famous man. Though his work had graced the walls of 4 cathedrals and a bishop's tomb, his style was muted, his faces thin and haunted. His name had appeared in the private notes of a Medici collector, and that had been enough. Still, this commission was strange. No patron had met him in person. The letter had come by courier, unsealed, unsigned, containing only a purse of gold and the words, "Paint him alone. At night, the frame waits." His lodging was prepared. It was a modest brick house on the outer fringe of the Lange Voorhout, leased under a name he did not recognize. Inside was a canvas already stretched, oils already mixed. Even his favored brushes were laid out with unfamiliar precision. He examined the pigments, umber, vermilion, lapis, but found the texture too thick, too dark, as if the paints had already begun to dry. The scent was not linseed, but something like burnt rosemary and iron filings. There was no host, only silence. The sitting was to begin the following night. He was to arrive at an address tucked deep behind the Kneuterdijk Palace Gardens. House of van der Zeven, the brief note read. No street, no number. Yet as the sun fell and the gas lamps flickered with the scent of tallow, he found the house with ease, as if his feet remembered it before he did. It rose like a forgotten tooth between ivy-covered walls, 3 stories of black stone and choked windows, none of them lit. The door opened before he knocked. A butler, or someone like it, stepped aside without words and gestured to the drawing room. The floor creaked with every step. The wallpaper, once damask, now bubbled with mildew and a subtle greenish sheen. A single candle burned atop the mantel, though no one had lit it in his presence. Then came the sitter. Hendrik van der Zeven entered not like a man, but like a statue, had stood and learned to walk. His clothes were outdated by at least half a century. A black doublet, tight at the waist, stiff white collar, no wig. His skin bore no rosiness, just the pallor of old parchment stretched thin and dry. His eyes, gray and rimmed in pink, met the painter's with a stillness too complete. He did not speak for nearly 5 minutes. He sat in the chair beneath the window, moonlight striking his left cheek, and nodded once. Van der Meulen adjusted his easel. The candle did not flicker. Then the nobleman spoke. "You will not leave until it is complete." Van der Meulen nodded, not quite understanding. "You will not paint me from memory," the nobleman continued. "Only from presence, only with me here, every night until it's done. Do you agree?" The painter hesitated. "I do." "Good." A pause. "Do not ask my age." He did not. The first night passed in near total silence. Van der Meulen worked with the stiff oils, mixing and remixing, but they refused to soften. Each brushstroke felt etched rather than painted, like cutting wax. The sitter never moved, never shifted in the chair, not even to blink. When the candle burned to its final inch, it sputtered blue, and the nobleman stood. "I will see you tomorrow." By the second night, Van der Meulen noticed the chair had not moved from the exact position he'd left it. Even the flecks of lint on the floor remained. Something was wrong in the air itself, a pressure like deep water. As if the room watched them both, he began to hum quietly. A childhood melody from the countryside near Gouda. The nobleman interrupted after 2 bars. "That note is wrong. It ends on D." The painter froze. He had not sung it aloud, only in his head. Outside, a wind began to rise. A documented entry from the city registry confirms Hendrik van der Zeven had once sat on the advisory council for the Court of Audit, but records cease in 1598, 34, years before this portrait was painted. No death notice, no family continuation, just a name suspended in ink and silence. And then there's the frame. It sat waiting as the letter had promised, carved of cherry wood blackened by fire. The back bore an inscription half chiseled, half burned into the wood. Induraque et vivit. It does not age, and it lives. The origin of the frame remains debated among scholars. Some say it came from a convent burned during the siege of Haarlem. Others claim it was a gift from a dying bishop who instructed that it only hold one soul. The truth lies buried in conflicting inventories and half-legible letters. What is known is this: van der Meulen began to sleepwalk. The innkeeper noted it in his ledger. Found him standing in the alley. Paint on his hands, barefoot, speaking to no one. One morning, the easel had shifted 2 feet overnight. When questioned, the painter denied touching it. Each evening, Anthony Claesson van der Meulen returned to the Van der Zeven, house like a moth fluttering toward a candle, not because it wished to burn, but because it could not help but turn. The door never locked. The path through the garden, choked with moonflowers and damp stone, always seemed unnaturally clear. No debris, no branches, no signs of age or storm. The painter began to feel as though he had ceased living outside these hours, that the world beyond the portrait existed only in the spaces between brush strokes. The sittings grew longer, the candlelight dimmer. Hendrik van der Zeven never failed to appear at the stroke of 9. Always dressed identically, always seated in the same rigid pose. The nobleman did not twitch, blink, or breathe heavily. Even the folds in his garments seemed prearranged. The painter once tried moving the chair 3 degrees clockwise to catch a different angle of light. When he returned from mixing a batch of verdigris, the chair had been moved back perfectly. The portrait itself began to emerge from shadow. The background was still bare, an amorphous void behind the seated figure, but the nobleman's face now loomed from the canvas, like something remembered too clearly in a dream. The high brow, the severe lips, the deadened pupils. Yet no matter how Anthony layered the whites of the eyes, they refused to look unpainted. He glazed and glazed, but the eyes always sat atop the canvas, never within. On the 9th sitting, the nobleman corrected him again. "You've captured the curve of the nose," he said without moving his mouth. But the mouth remains unburdened. Unburdened? It must know something. Give it weight. Anthony flinched. There was no light source that would justify the new shadow in the portrait's mouth, but there it was, a faint downturn, an implication of knowledge. From that point onward, the artist began to feel observed by the work. When he stepped away from the easel, he no longer looked back. Not directly. He caught glimpses of the canvas in the mirror above the fireplace, small, trembling flashes in which the sitter's posture seemed to shift, ever so slightly, as if adjusting in mockery of his labor. Each time he turned to confront it, the painting remained as he had left it. Something else had begun to fade as well: sound. The ticking of the clock, the whistle of wind through the floorboards, the rustle of the nobleman's coat, all of it dulled. Only the scraping of brush on canvas remained sharp. That and the nobleman's voice, whenever he chose to use it. According to a preserved letter discovered in the Koninklijke Bibliotheek, van der Meulen wrote to his brother Peter, "The sitter knows things he could not know. My training, my dreams, even that I've used cheaper oxgall in the past. I never told him. He watches the way I watched our father pray after mother died. Like he's seeing everything through a crack in the world." The fringe detail that continues to haunt modern researchers comes from a diary entry by van der Meulen's landlord, dated April 1632. He has begun to sleep upright. I found him at dawn in the hallway, head tilted exactly as his subject. His eyes open, unmoving. I feared to touch him. No confirmed evidence explains the sitter's identity during these weeks. No servants reported preparing his clothes. No household staff recalled food being taken to his rooms. No waste, no sound of chamber pots emptied. Nowhere on the floorboards from footsteps leading to bed, and yet the man never missed a sitting. One scholar, Dr. Helena Volkert, wrote in her 1973 monograph Eidolon, Unnatural. Portraits of the 17th century. There is no indication van der Zeven ever left his chair. Even the cats of the household, which appear in earlier estate records, vanish from the home's bookkeeping after 1631. Some believe the sitter subsisted on nothing. Others believe he fed on something less material. An unresolved question endures among curators. If the portrait was painted across only 17 nights, as the artist's surviving calendar notes claim, how is it that the underpainting layer shows as fully dry beneath the surface? Lab testing in 1991 confirmed the base coat had undergone oxidation, consistent with at least 3 months of aging before the second layer was applied. This anomaly defies the limits of 17th century oil technique, unless the underpainting had aged separately. Unless the sitter somehow had been painted before, Anthony began to smell salt in the paint. He touched nothing but oils and linen, yet his fingers stung each morning as though soaked in brine. Beneath his bed, the wooden slats grew soft with humidity. A dark crust formed at the corners of his eyes. He developed a tremor in his right wrist, but it vanished the moment his brush neared the sitter's mouth. On the 12th night, the nobleman made a request. "You will paint my hands tomorrow." Anthony nodded, though he had not yet asked to do so. "And you will include the ring." "There is no ring," the painter said. "There is now." He looked up. The nobleman extended his left hand. A signet ring now encircled the middle finger, black stone, engraved with a symbol Anthony did not recognize, a triangle, pierced by a downward hook. He reached toward it, thinking to study it more closely, but his hand stopped an inch short of the skin. He could not make himself touch the flesh. The next night he painted the ring. It glistened on the canvas in a way real gold did not, though he used only ochre and umber. The light seemed to bleed into it from unseen places. The following morning, in his rented room, a fly emerged from his pillow. It hovered near his cheek for minutes, not moving, its legs twitching in time with his heartbeat. When he killed it, the blood inside was not red but black, and the pillow's stuffing had begun to rot from the center. It hovered near his cheek for minutes, not moving, its legs twitching in time with his heartbeat. When he killed it, the blood inside was not red but black, and the pillow's stuffing had begun to rot from the center. The next night, when he returned to the house, the nobleman was already seated, eyes open, mouth slightly curved, and both hands folded as he had painted them. He said nothing, and for the first time, neither did the painter. By the 13th night, the paint resisted the brush. It clung in gelatinous strands, dragging like sinew across the canvas. Anthony Clazoon van der Meulen sharpened his tools, scalpels now, more than brushes, and began to scrape the dried edges. But even this proved fruitless. The pigment reabsorbed itself. Every correction he made was erased by morning, as if the painting insisted on becoming something other than what he intended. He left the Van der Zeven house in the gray wash of dawn, his eyes watering and lips parched, and made his way to the apothecary. His regular pigment supplier, a sallow-eyed widower named Matthijs de Witte, had not been seen for over a week. The shop was shuttered. In the alley behind it, he found a trail of broken glass, a cracked mortar bowl, and something sticky that smelled faintly of copper and wine. Rumors began to slip through the taverns. Whispers passed in corners, where torchlight did not reach. De Witte, they said, had gone mad after receiving a secret order from an unknown patron. Gallons of ox blood delivered in barrels, marked only with the crest of the Van der Zeven house. It was said he had begun to talk to the paints, referring to them by name, murmuring to jars before applying them to canvas. Then he disappeared. No search was made. The constables had not been paid to ask questions of Van der Zeven. A single fact remains recorded in the Delft Guild book. An apprentice reported the master's studio smelling like hot brassenrot. Another noted a strange pigment swatch labeled coagulatum purpureus, a deep crimson, not found in any known palette, streaked with black veins. The painter, desperate, began to use what was left of his own stores. But even these began to behave oddly. The red pigment refused to dry. The black seeped upward against gravity. The canvas grew heavier each night, as though absorbing more than paint, so much so that it took 2 men to reposition it on its frame during a thunderstorm that broke the sky open above The Hague. He wrote nothing in his notebook that week. It was only after returning from a particularly silent sitting, one in which Van der Zeven had not spoken, moved, or even felt human, that Anthony finally allowed himself to confront the thing forming beneath his brush. It was not a portrait, not in the traditional sense. It was a containment, a vessel, and whatever now looked back at him through the veil of turpentine and varnish was no longer just a nobleman frozen in time. The mouth now smiled faintly, but in ways the painter could not recall painting. The lips were dry, cracked, but gleamed as though freshly moistened. The left cheek had hollowed slightly, and the jaw appeared clenched. Viewers described the teeth showing faintly through the skin, but Anthony had never painted teeth. He remembered this because of what happened next. The barmaid at De Rode Leeuw, where Anthony now took his nightly bread and ale, mentioned something peculiar. A patron had come in asking for the painter by name. An older man wrapped in an oilskin coat smelling of linseed and mold. He left no coin, only a single question. Has he completed the mouth yet? Anthony did not return to the tavern after that night. Instead, he returned to the house early, before dusk, something he had never done. The door was ajar. The interior smelled of lavender and sulfur. The candle on the mantel had burned to a nub, yet it still gave off light. He stepped into the drawing room and found the nobleman already seated, eyes wide, lips parted, waiting. And for the first time, van der Meulen asked a question. "What are you?" The figure didn't move, didn't answer, but the candlelight pulsed, and in the stillness, Anthony could swear he heard the word frame. A detail long ignored now became prominent. The back of the canvas, where normally only stretcher bars and linen would rest, now bore a faint imprint, a shape that was not there before. A handprint, pressed from the inside. The fringe theory suggested decades later by art historian Felix Kramer was that the pigment used in van der Meulen's painting had been mixed with something far older than blood. Kramer argued that a 15th century prisoner ledger listed Acclessun Antony, sentenced to death for heretical image-making, who allegedly painted not portraits, but containers for restless spirits. The painter's name, of course, was reversed. And the dates didn't match, but the resemblance was uncanny. Anthony could feel it now, some inheritance of function, as though his hands knew what to do before he did. He painted the last edge of the mouth that night, and it bled, not visibly, not overtly, but a sheen of pink. Moisture welled at the lower lip before drying into a glistening stain. The canvas was cold to the touch, yet his fingers blistered when he grazed it. Another documented fact. On the 16th night, a tremor was recorded by the local astronomer, stationed atop the Nieuwe Kerk. His note reads, "Minor terrestrial shaking, origin uncertain, not seismic, a vibration more than a quake." Unfelt by most, but recorded on the mercury pendulum at 2:16 a.m. The epicenter was roughly mapped to the van der Zeven estate. That same night, Anthony fell asleep for the first time in the sitter's room. He had meant to clean his brushes. He had meant to seal the oils. Instead, he sat too long, the air thick with turpentine and the slow, syrupy scent of iron. When he awoke, the room was unchanged, except for one thing. The nobleman was no longer in the chair. The painting was. The sitter had moved inside it. Anthony stood before the canvas, numb with cold, staring at the figure within. The hands were folded precisely. The ring glinted. The mouth, painted by his hand, twitched, then stilled. Behind him, the chair creaked. He did not turn. Dawn broke reluctantly over Delft, smeared behind a veil of fog that clung to the brickwork like wet gauze. In the upper room of the van der Zeven house, where no curtains had ever been drawn, the air refused to move. There was no dust, no bird song, no echo of the market bells. Anthony Claeszoon van der Meulen did not remember standing, but he stood. His hands trembled, not from fatigue nor cold, but the uncanny stillness that now coiled through his joints. There is a particular kind of exhaustion, reserved for those who have seen something unfit, for human comprehension, and for Anthony it took the shape of silence, a silence so absolute that it muffled his thoughts. He turned finally. The chair was empty. Its cushion bore the faint impression of weight. Yet no footsteps led away. No shift in light suggested a body had ever filled that space. The portrait was not empty. It was whole. Van der Zeven stared out from the canvas, eyes gleaming, mouth sealed in a thin, knowing line. The hands, folded with such precision that it was no longer a depiction of rest, but of restraint. One finger curled under the palm, subtly, unnaturally, a twitch frozen in oil. And the ring had changed. It had been an unmarked black stone, but now it bore an engraving no hand had etched. A sigil, something akin to a monastic brand, a triangle, again but now interlocked with a second form beneath it. A hook, a serpent? Scholars still debate. No pigment sample has successfully isolated the component that caused the shimmer. The final stroke of the painting, he realized, had not been his. Someone or something had added it during the hours he slept. The outline around the portrait's frame had darkened, thickened. What had once been a background void now seemed more like a tunnel or a door. The painted edges curled inward, forming the illusion of depth. Illusion or passage, one recorded fact, preserved in a single letter from a local maid, notes this day with chilling mundanity. The artist is changed. He speaks less, but the picture is more present. It watches the room. I've started turning it to the wall. By the 18th day, Anthony began wearing gloves at all times, even to sleep. His fingernails had turned dark beneath the cuticle, and his fingerprints were gradually smoothing. The soft skin of his fingertips, once so sensitive to the tremble of bristle on linen, had lost all texture. When he reached for things, they no longer obeyed him immediately. On the 19th day, he returned to the frame with nails and hammer in hand. He would seal it, lock it behind glass, paint over it if necessary. But when he entered the drawing room, he found the portrait gone. Only the frame remained. He ran from room to room, heart hammering. The house was silent. The corners felt deeper. Mirrors reflected at slightly wrong angles. The old grandfather clock in the hall now ticked without rhythm. And then he saw it. The painting had relocated itself to the hallway wall, just outside the chamber of Van der Zeven's father, who had died in that very bed 2 winters prior. The canvas hung there now, impossibly centered, level, and newly varnished. And the sitter? He smiled now, not grotesquely but subtly, as if greeting an old friend returned to finish a forgotten conversation. Anthony stepped forward. He reached for the frame. His gloves brushed the wood. It was warm. Then the canvas shivered. Not with wind, not with movement, with resistance. A pressure radiated outward from it, like the recoil of heat from a dying fire. It struck his chest and filled his lungs with something that tasted like coin and candle wax. He staggered back. And then the voice came again, not from the sitter, not from the room, but from the canvas itself. Low, diffused, like something echoing from a basement sealed long ago. Now, it said, we begin. Here the records splinter into hearsay. Several accounts describe a change in the artist's behavior. He no longer returned to his lodgings. He ceased payment on his debts. A tavern boy swore he saw the painter outside the city gate, muttering to himself and sketching symbols into the soil with the butt of a burned-out brush. But the most disturbing detail comes from a funeral record. Anthony's brother Peter had died unexpectedly in Leiden that same month. His last correspondence, dated only days before his death, contains the cryptic note, "Do not let him finish the second." The frame must remain closed. The hand must not open. The second, there was to be another painting. No commission exists in the guild records, and no surviving sketch refers to it directly. But a note found later inside a hollowed panel in Van der Meulen's satchel offers a final suggestion. One figure in, one figure out. The likeness must echo. There must always be two. The fringe theory proposed by occult historian Sophie Verlag is both the most detailed and the most unsettling. She suggests the portrait was not a record, but a transfer, a conduit, one that allows the sitter to move between states, between image and world. Her claim, the sitter entered. The painter, perhaps unknowingly, took his place. Indeed, on the 21st morning, the staff of the house found Anthony seated in the chair, gloved hands folded, eyes wide, silent. The frame was once again empty. Not blank. Empty. The oil had been scraped off, not violently but delicately, like flesh peeled with care from a preserved corpse. There was no pile of pigment, no shards of varnish. The canvas was bare, yet bore a faint, greasy sheen, as though something had been extracted from it. The painter would not move. He would not eat. He stared at the frame without blinking. When finally asked what he saw, he whispered only, he needed a frame. I gave him mine. It was the winter of 1867 when the portrait resurfaced. A trunk, water-damaged and bound in brass, arrived anonymously at the Rijksmuseum's receiving hall in Amsterdam. There was no return address, no shipping manifest, only a folded vellum slip affixed to the latch, bearing 2 words in faded script, Zeven's frame. When they pried the lock open, the smell emerged first, a bitter, metallic staleness like decayed cedar and dried blood. Inside, wrapped in mold-worn velvet, lay the painting, a Baroque oil portrait, unsigned, undated, and unnervingly preserved. The canvas was whole. The wood had warped slightly from age, but the image itself had suffered no fading. The figure sat in a high-backed chair, hands folded, gaze forward. The ring was visible. So was the smile, thin, mirthless, secretive. A subtle change, museum staff would later say, depending on who looked and how long they stared. The head conservator at the time, Daniel Goudsmit, ordered a preliminary examination. According to his handwritten log, surface uncracked, pigment stable, canvas oddly warm to touch. He requested X-ray imaging, though the technology was primitive. The resulting image showed layers that should not have existed. A hand beneath the paint, another hand, slightly misaligned with the visible one. More disturbing still, the sitter's bones appeared shifted, tilted inward, as if the spine were curling unnaturally beneath the clothes. A documented fact from Goudsmith's notes. Under red filter, eye layer shows additional iris beneath visible paint, twinned pupils. The fringe element emerged days later when museum staff reported sounds coming from the crate room, tapping, slow and deliberate. 4 short knocks, then silence. It was dismissed until the crate was reopened and 2 tools were found moved, 1 missing entirely. The missing item, a restoration scalpel, finely honed, later found in the east wing, embedded an inch deep into the wooden floor near a disused chapel painting. Unresolved still is the question of who shipped the portrait. No museum claimed prior ownership. No Dutch catalog recorded its acquisition, but an archived purchase log from a private collector in Leipzig, dated 1796, lists a painting of a man entombed in oil. Artist unknown, cursed in pigment, valued for confinement. The description matches the portrait precisely. By the time the museum's winter exhibition opened in 1868, the portrait was on display. No nameplate, no frame origin. Visitors simply referred to it as the man in red shadow. Theories proliferated. Some said it was a political figure, erased from history, an executioner, disguised in wealth. Others claimed the sitter was alive at the time of painting and still is. A lesser-known theory held that the image functioned as a kind of mirror, not of self, but of intent. That if one stared long enough, the sitter's expression would shift to mimic the viewer's unspoken desires. The portrait was placed in a side corridor, beside the 17th century Dutch works. In a low-lit alcove, the curators began to refer to as het stiltekruis, the silence cross. Its corner was colder than the surrounding space by 3 degrees, though no ventilation anomaly was ever confirmed. By the second month of display, museum attendance dropped. Not dramatically, just subtly, a thinning of footfall in the wings closest to the painting. The cleaning staff began requesting reassignment. One guard filed a formal report stating, "The painting blinked. I was not tired." It was the disappearance of visitor, No. 217 on February 12th, that brought official scrutiny. She entered the wing just after midday, seen in the reflection of a glass display as she paused before the portrait. She does not appear again, not in corridor footage, not on any exit logs. Her coat was later found folded beneath the bench opposite the painting. Her handbag remained, contents untouched. 1 ticket stub, a lipstick, and a note scribbled hastily on an exhibition brochure. He leaned forward. No legal action was taken. The museum quietly closed the wing for climate control renovations. Conservator Goudsmith, already rattled, began to petition for removal of the piece. His final letter to the Board of Trustees read, "I believe the painting functions as an aperture, not a symbol, a literal opening. We do not know what entered, but it is looking back, and it is learning." He died 5 days later of what was listed as apoplexy. His daughter later told a local journal that he had stopped sleeping entirely and spent his nights sketching impossible architecture, rooms inside frames, stairs leading into mouths. A century later, that same letter would surface in the estate sale of a Belgian occultist, folded within a book titled Vastum Imaginis, a treatise on contained souls. The portrait vanished from the museum archives in 1871. It was not stolen. It was never listed as deaccessioned or sold. The official record simply ceases. The inventory book bearing the annotation, "Transferred to holding, under watch." Where it went remains unknown. But 2 decades later, in 1892, a Dutch scholar named Willem Graaf published a private paper, never widely circulated, titled "The Frame is Wound." In it, he describes a liminal canvas that, when encountered, changes both painting and viewer. His final line reads, "It is not art, it is an infection. It spreads through gaze." And then, like van der Meulen before him, Graaf disappears from the record. The Rijksmuseum has never confirmed the painting's reappearance. But in the 1950s, a low-resolution photo surfaced in an archival box mislabeled furniture inventory. It shows a dark frame leaned against a cellar wall, with a figure barely visible in shadow. In the grainy image, the mouth appears parted, and just above the left shoulder, a hand, not the sitter's, a second hand, pressed against the canvas from within. At the edge of Wiltshire, near a wood that maps no longer name and where the fog is said to arrive, early and never quite lit. There stands a house of uncertain age. Locals call it the Black House, though its stone walls are gray, not black, weathered granite, streaked with ivy and soot and always damp. The chimneys breathe even when the hearths do not burn. In 1903, the estate passed into the hands of Algernon Dace, a reclusive collector of spiritual artifacts, as he termed them in his private catalogues. His fortune came from mill contracts, his obsession from somewhere more esoteric. Dace was a quiet man. No scandals, no criminal record, just rooms full of impossible things. It was here, in the West Wing, behind 3 locked doors, and a velvet curtain, that the portrait re-emerged. No customs records place it in England. No transport receipts exist. But Dace's 1904 inventory lists, under a heading marked Objects Acquired Without Consent. Item 36, unlabeled Dutch portrait, oil on linen, subject unknown, frame active, no display permitted. He had built a room for it, a room with no windows and no mirrors. A copper plate was affixed to the floor, grounded to the earth with iron rods. The painting was suspended by 4 wires from the ceiling, floating inches from the wall. Dace wrote, "Must not touch frame, must not touch ground, must not reflect." A documented fact. Dace never allowed anyone into the room alone. 2 witnesses were always required. Yet staff reported he sometimes vanished inside for hours, and when he emerged, he would speak in dead languages, once in Latin, once in something his housekeeper described as like glass cracking underwater. The portrait was observed to change, slowly, subtly. The first change was to the background. Once a flat, dark void, now it deepened. Developed layers, a suggestion of archways, a hallway curving to the left. Too narrow for any real passage. Then came the collar. Originally lace, it thickened over time, becoming more rigid, almost like armor. But the sitter's expression was the most watched. Dace wrote in his journal, "He knows me now. I blink and his lips twitch. I turn away and he forgets me again. It is like teaching a child to lie." Fringe detail, during a seance conducted in 1906 with the Society for Psychical Research, a medium brought to the house insisted that the painting was a prison, not of the sitter, but for a voice wrapped in face. She fainted before the session ended. Her final words, reportedly, were, "He is not the only one in there." Shortly afterward, Dace began wearing a silver blindfold during his visits to the portrait room. He claimed it allowed him to feel the changes without being seen in return. The house began to creak, audibly and often, though no wind was felt, and the trees outside remained still. Servants reported finding their bedsheets folded into triangles each morning. One footman awoke to find his shoes placed at the doorway of the portrait room, the laces tied in sailor's knots. A child visiting from a neighboring estate drew a picture of the Mirror Man. She had not been shown the painting. She described a tall figure with no face, only a flat window where the eyes should be. When asked why she drew him, she replied, "Because he wants to be outside again." In 1908, Dace ceased writing in his journals. In place of words, he left diagrams, circles within rectangles, with marked corners labeled egress and oblation. One note reads, "The frame is not a border. It is a door locked from the inside." Scholarly debate centers on the figure's identity. Was it ever van der Zeven? Was it someone older, inserted, overwritten, shaped in the layers beneath? Art historian Malcolm Blythe proposed in 1953 that the painting may be a temporal parasite, a work not bound to a fixed moment, but rather one that evolves across centuries, absorbing meaning, manipulating viewers, gradually altering itself to suit the time. His most chilling quote, "We don't preserve it, it preserves us." Then, on the evening of November 2nd, 1910, Dace was found dead, not collapsed, not torn or broken, simply seated, in the chair opposite the painting, fully dressed, blindfold in place. His heart had stopped, but there was no sign of fear, no struggle, a faint smile on his lips. The doctor recorded the time of death at 3:17 a.m., roughly the same hour that the copper grounding wires had been found sheared, clean through, as though sliced by heat or sudden force. The portrait? It was gone. In its place, a smudge on the wall. A square of soot in the exact shape of the frame, and embedded in the wood floor where the painting had hung. The silver blindfold crumpled into a knot, like something clenched it from within. To this day, no one knows how the painting left. There was no sign of entry or exit. No footprints, no broken locks, only silence. The Black House remained empty for decades. When it was purchased in 1979 for redevelopment, workers reported strange interference on their equipment. A survey drone malfunctioned and sent back only one image, a blurred photo of an interior hallway. At the end of it stood a figure, small and indistinct, lit from behind. And on the far wall, a frame, empty, waiting. The steel vault beneath, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, is not on the public tour. Officially, it does not exist. Deep below the archival floors, behind shelves of mold-darkened manuscripts and taxonomic anomalies, there lies a corridor without a number, one that narrows slightly as it descends, as though the air itself forgets to widen. In 1931, a cataloguer named Etienne Lemoine was assigned to this level. It was a quiet exile. He had made himself unpopular by insisting that certain documents were self-editing. He claimed to have read footnotes that vanished when copied, seen titles rearranged on their spines overnight. His superiors called it fatigue. His reassignment was intended to calm him. It did not. Instead, it brought him closer. Among the crates stored under Objets divers, période inconnue, Lemoine discovered a long wooden box sealed with 7 wax marks. Each bore a different seal, one Masonic, one Templar, one illegible, and 4 unrecorded. The box had no origin manifest, no accession tag. Inside, wrapped in layers of salted linen and copper mesh, was the portrait. The frame was scorched on one edge. A corner appeared warped as if heated from within, but the image untouched. The same figure, the same twisted smile. Yet now the background arches had grown deeper. A shadow fell across the sitter's left shoulder, and within it the suggestion of movement. Lemoine did not inform his superiors. He did not record the item. He hid it. In a recess between 2 structural pillars on level 3, he constructed a false shelf, lined it with lead, and placed the portrait inside. Over time he returned again and again, at first to sketch, then to write, then only to watch. A documented entry from his notebook, dated May 4th, 1932. I timed it. The gaze changes every 7 hours. A slight shift, then stillness. When I blink, I miss it. But I feel it, correcting itself. The bizarre detail emerged later. Lemoine's notes began to include conversations, dialogues, with someone labeled only as S. Sometimes it's the sitter, sometimes something else. The voice, he wrote, does not come from the painting. It comes from the frame. S says I am the 7th, that I am of the door. I do not know what this means. And here the debates begin. Was Lemoine hallucinating? Was he documenting a pattern or inventing it? Some say he was the first to see the painting, not as a haunted object but as a device, a mechanism whose function had not yet been understood. He began drawing what he called ingress diagrams, maps of the frame's interior perspective. One diagram is labeled reverse stair lead mouthward. Another, not dimension but recursion. One sitter infinite seats. When finally questioned in 1935 after a routine audit revealed his unauthorized movements, Lemoine denied everything. But before he was dismissed, he left one final memo on his desk, typed but unsigned. The portrait does not age, but it adapts. I believe it is building something slowly over centuries. I think it is waiting for an image precise enough to hold it fully. Ours are not yet sufficient, but we are getting closer. They searched for the painting. They found nothing. The shelf was there, empty. The copper mesh gone. No trace of soot or pigment. But the lead panels were warped, pushed outward, as if something had expanded inside, then vanished. The portrait would not be seen again for nearly 40 years. But Lemoine's sketches survived, stored in a sealed drawer until their rediscovery in 1982 by a postdoctoral researcher. They showed something no one could quite explain. Portraits, dozens of them, all the same figure, but not static. In one, the sitter holds a book. In another, a key. In yet another, his hands are missing altogether, replaced by 2 loops of twisted wire. And in the last, no face, only the ring, set against a void so black it seemed to swallow the paper itself. Fringe speculation swirls around the 7th sketch. The ring sigil, when cross-referenced with glyphs from the Voynich manuscript, forms a partial phonetic match to the phrase sanguinem portae, Latin for blood of the gate. Coincidence, say some. Ritual language, say others. But the unresolved question that scholars return to, again and again, if Lemoine was the 7th, who were the others? And who or what is the 8th? There are rumors, of course, that the portrait appears only at thresholds, at moments of cultural transition, in the hollows between faith and reason, image and presence. that it is not of this world but through it, a membrane stretched thin by centuries of observation, as if with every viewer it sharpens, learns. There is a note, rarely cited, from the unpublished writings of Walter Benjamin. In his fragment on objects of recursive memory, he mentions a painting in the archive that does not preserve a face, but perfects it over time using us as mirrors. Scholars dismiss it as metaphor, but in the margin, scrawled in red pencil, is a name, Van der Zeven, and below it, circled twice. It looks back. The photograph arrived unannounced in 1973, folded in a pale blue envelope, postmarked but unsigned. It landed on the desk of Dr. Hannah Metzger, then curator of anomalies at the Stiftung für unerklärliche Kunst in Hamburg, a small private institution devoted to the preservation of artworks, deemed unclassifiable. The image showed a gallery wall. No people, no plaque. Just one painting, tall, dimly lit, too dark to see clearly. But in the corner of the photo, almost missed, a sliver of canvas captured in clarity. A face. The same face. Dr. Metzger had never seen the original, but she had read the accounts, Lemoyne's sketches, Dace's diagrams, the whispered fragments from the Rijksmuseum's sealed years. She knew what it was, or what it pretended to be. She magnified the image. What she found chilled her. In the sitter's right eye, barely visible in the blur of pixels and grain, there was a reflection, not of the photographer, but of something behind them. A tall figure distorted by glass, and beside it, on the floor, what appeared to be a book, open, bleeding ink into the wood. A documented fact. 3 other envelopes arrived across Europe that year, 1 in Prague, 1 in Bergen, and 1 in Toulouse. All contained nearly identical photographs, all postmarked from a town that did not exist. Grevelstein. No records, no maps, a phantom location. But in each case, the eye in the painting reflected something different. In the Prague photo, it showed a clock. In Bergen, a door slightly ajar. In Toulouse, a fire, still burning. And in each, the sitter's face had subtly altered. Dr. Metzger began a file she titled Portraitus Continuum. Over the next 5 years, she traced rumors of the painting's re-emergence, through backrooms and border zones, where art and secrecy entangled. A private gallery in Vienna claimed to own a Dutch ghost canvas, displayed only under moonlight. A retired intelligence officer from East Berlin spoke of an image used in psychological operations, never shown directly, but said to increase paranoia in those who handled it. He called it das Auge, das verlernt zu schlafen, the eye that forgets how to sleep. One lead brought her to a collector in Lisbon, who had catalogued a painting matching the description in 1966. It had arrived from a church estate in Porto, sealed in wax and chain, with only one warning written in Portuguese, Nunca olhe sozinho. Never look alone. Metzger visited him in 1977. He was blind, not from birth, but recently, he claimed the damage came from inside the eye, not upon it. When she asked if he still had the painting, he laughed until tears fell. I never had it, he said. It had me, and it needed darkness. She noted that in his home, every mirror was covered, every window boarded. His walls were bare, save for one indentation, rectangular, roughly the dimensions of a large portrait frame. Fringe detail. A technician assisting Metzger in digitizing old microfilm reels noticed a recurring artifact in several unrelated film negatives, ranging from WWI trench documentation to cold war satellite footage. A small pattern of brushstroke appeared in corners, often dismissed as printing flaws, but when isolated and overlaid, the strokes formed part of a face. The same left eye, always looking up and slightly left, always in a place it should not be. Scholars remain divided. Is it coincidence, a projection of fear onto pattern, or is it something stranger, a visual presence so fixed, so ancient in its form that it begins to assert itself wherever images live? One theory, called perceptual recursion, argues that the portrait is not singular, that it is an evolving phenomenon, an echo of the same gaze, replicating itself through artistic media across time. Not just a painting, but a behavior. If true, it would explain the anomalies, the disappearance, the reappearance, the shifted expressions, the warped reflections. Each sighting may not be of the same painting, but of the same intention. Dr. Metzger's final attempt to locate it came through an unexpected source. A child's drawing submitted to a Berlin community arts program in 1979. Crayon on paper. A seated man. A red ring. a hallway behind him, and beneath the child's signature, a note written in perfect cursive. He needs a name again. No adult could explain the message. The child was 7. The handwriting did not match hers. Metzger resigned that year. Her note stopped mid-sentence on October 3rd, her final fragment. The eye no longer waits to be seen. It wanders. No photograph of the painting has surfaced since. But in 1991, a curator at the Mauritshuis in The Hague received a voicemail with no voice, just a low static hum. When analyzed, the audio wave contained an anomaly. A visual spectrogram showed a pattern like cross-hatching, brush strokes, a faint curve, possibly a face. Unresolved still is the question of authorship. If the painting adapts, who directs it? Is the hand behind it human? Or, as Metzger once speculated in a footnote, few ever read, what if the portrait is not made by hands at all, but by attention? What if we have been painting it, slowly, with our looking? In the silence that follows the image, one is left with only the gaze. Not theirs, ours. It began without ceremony. On the morning of January 2nd, 1996, the municipal workers of Pienza, a quiet hill town in Tuscany, reported to the Palazzo delle Ombre, a small regional museum built atop an abandoned convent. The building, long ignored by tourists, housed little of note: fragments of altarpieces, rusted devotional artifacts, a few anonymous Renaissance sketches. But that morning, one of the main display halls had been altered. In the center of the chamber, resting against a newly installed plinth, stood a painting. No label, no signature, and no memory among staff or curators of having received it. The hall had been locked, the alarms untouched, the visitor logs clean. But here it was, a portrait of a man seated within a ringed arch, his mouth half parted in expressionless calm, one eye partially in shadow. The background, a corridor of indefinite length, receded into geometries, too precise to be Renaissance, yet textured as if layered by hand. And the frame, it was oak, darkened to near black, rimmed in irregular bevels like vertebrae. Small silver tacks, not nails, held the canvas in place, though none pierced it. Around the lower edge, a faint engraving in Latin. Ejus vultus vertit memoria mem. His face turns my memory. A documented fact. Within a week, 2 museum employees resigned without explanation. A third reported recurring. Dreams of staircases that rotated underfoot and corridors that widened as she approached. She described hearing footsteps in the exhibit hall even when alone. By the end of that month, the museum quietly sealed the portrait behind blackout drapes. They issued no press release. They did not return inquiries. The director at the time, Luca Velluti, wrote only a single line in his internal memo. We have become host to a presence. Then came the visitors. Not many, fewer than a dozen in the first year. But each claimed to have read of the painting somewhere, in a catalog or journal that no longer existed. One said she saw it in a dream before discovering it here. Another, a retired professor from Naples, insisted it had once hung in his childhood library before the war. Yet no record of such placement has ever been confirmed. Each visitor requested to see it alone. None were allowed to. Fringe detail: a photographer granted access under controlled lighting conditions, reported technical failures, lens distortions, chemical errors in the darkroom, and one development where the sitter's head appeared turned, as though caught in mid-glance. The original painting had not changed, or so it seemed. In April of 1997, a small crack was found in the upper left corner of the canvas. Unusual, given the protective climate control and the age of the paint. The next week, a second crack appeared in the opposite corner. By summer, a network of fissures spread across the surface. Though under infrared examination, no loss of pigment or varnish was detected. Rather, the pattern seemed to resemble cartography. Ridges, valleys, lines that converged toward the sitter's eye, then vanished inward beneath the paint, as if sinking into a depth no brush had ever reached. The museum debated removing the painting for preservation, but Velluti insisted, "It does not reside with us. We converge toward it." The internal debate became public only once. In 1998, an anonymous article in an Italian journal, L'Arte, Insolita, claimed that the painting induced behavioral shifts in those who stared too long. Visitors became quiet, unsettled. One man allegedly refused to leave the room for 9 hours. When pressed, he said only, "It remembers me. I must return the favor." The article was retracted within days. The issue pulped. The author never identified. By 2000, the museum stopped advertising the room altogether, but reports continued, not from within but around. Unexplained power outages in the exhibit wing, faint, repetitive tapping sounds in the ventilation system, always 3 taps, then silence. The motion detectors recorded sporadic flickers of movement during closed hours, once for 12 seconds. The temperature of the room dropped by 9 degrees Celsius, no external cause determined. The portrait remained unchanged. And yet, the face grew harder to describe. Staff who had once recognized its features began to disagree. Some said the man's eyes were brown, others gray-blue. Some recalled a beard, others none. A small study conducted in 2001 invited 20 participants to sketch the portrait from memory. Not a single drawing matched another. But one detail remained consistent. The ring. Each sketch showed it. The twisted band on the sitter's right hand, shaped like an Ouroboros, though with no head or tail. Just the endless coil, darker than the shadows, thinner than paint. An unresolved question remains to this day. Who brought the painting to Pienza? No van records, no donor, no acquisition logs, not even a crate. It was simply there. One theory posits that the portrait relocates itself, choosing sites. Like seeds find soil, that it arrives where it is most likely to be believed, or worse, where it might best grow. Another, more theological, suggests the painting is a form of invitation, that its presence is never accidental but strategic. Each relocation a test, a filtering. In 2004, Velluti retired. His final entry in the museum log: "It is no longer waiting. It is watching, and now we watch each other." The room remains sealed. But sometimes during heavy storms, when the lights flicker, guards report hearing a soft creak behind the velvet curtain, like canvas stretching, like a smile almost. The rumors had reached Krakow before the century turned. Whispers in conservation circles, strange footnotes in grant reports, a sudden spike in anonymous donations to the Jagiellonian University's Department of Art Semiotics. By 2007, Dr. Tadeusz Góra had taken notice, not because he believed them, but because he did not. Góra had built a career dismantling myths. As a forensic image analyst, his specialty was authentication through negation, proving that what appeared real was not. He had debunked 3 alleged Rembrandts, one miraculous medieval weeping Madonna, and a scroll purporting to predict the fall of the Berlin Wall. To him, truth lived in pigment layers, not poetry. But what intrigued him about this painting, the supposed wandering portrait, was not what people saw. It was what they forgot. A documented fact, in early 2008, Berlin. Archive released scans from an anonymous estate sale, hundreds of mid-century family photos, boxed and untouched for decades. But in 6 of the images, embedded in reflections, mirrors and window panes, the same figure appeared, always blurred, always seated, and always wearing the ring. The family name was Dietrich. The children had no memory of such a man. Góra, skeptical, ordered the images tested. No splicing, no tampering. Emulsions matched their claimed dates. 1946 to 1961. He dismissed it as pareidolia, a fluke of posture and shadow. Then he looked again. In each photo, the figure's head was slightly turned, just enough to track the camera. The face, though obscured, was undeniably the same. Not just similar, fixed. He began compiling private archives, forgotten church bulletins, dusty gallery catalogs, all fringe, all minor. But the pattern emerged. The portrait had not merely reappeared in formal settings, it had begun leaking into the mundane, matchbooks, postcards, even graffiti, and always distorted, always slightly wrong, as if struggling to remember its own face. Dr. Góra coined the term portrait drift syndrome, the phenomenon by which the same image, recalled by multiple unconnected sources, shows consistent mutations, not due to memory decay, but some shared revision. He proposed that this specific painting might not just be appearing. It was being recalled, as if the image had embedded itself into a cognitive structure. Not a painting, but a mnemonic. One that remembered you, as much as you remembered it. Fringe detail. In 2009, a blindfolded experiment was conducted at a symposium in Poznan. 20 participants were asked to describe a man in a painting they had never seen. Each was given only vague cues. Dutch, 17th century, unfinished. To the astonishment of the organizers, 14 described a seated figure, hands clasped or hidden, a hallway behind, a shadowed arch above, and 10 mentioned a ring. This drew the attention of a cross-disciplinary group of neuroscientists and semioticians who hypothesized a shared archetypal motif. But deeper analysis of their language revealed a subtler thread. The words they used, arched, parted, waiting, behind, below, occurred disproportionately in texts about thresholds, initiation rituals, and traumatic memory. An unresolved question surfaced. Could the painting function as a kind of attractor? Not merely an image seen, but an image awaited, a form we expect without knowing why. Dr. Gora became obsessed. He began sketching the face from memory each morning, logging the minute changes. First the eyebrows shifted, then the mouth. Then, one morning, the eyes were gone. Just sockets, empty, not with horror, but with invitation. He no longer sees me, Gora wrote. I think I must look for him now. In 2010, he vanished. His apartment was undisturbed. His notebooks left open on the desk. Only one thing was missing, a file marked 7. Inside were catalog numbers linked to portraits across Europe, all dating to the 1630s, many unattributed, all now re-examined. One, housed in a private collection in Bruges, drew particular attention. Painted in oil, unsigned, it shows no figure, just an empty chair, and on the floor beside it, faint but unmistakable, a ring. This led to what is now called the Gallery of Misremembered Faces, an online archive of images believed falsely or otherwise to be iterations of the same painting. It includes formal portraits, video stills, sketches recovered from dreams, thousands of submissions. Most are nonsense, but a few bear the same unsettling logic, shifting shadow directions, expressions that do not align with brush strokes, spatial geometries that curve toward impossibility, faces that seem to be waiting for something or someone. A recurring feature across the gallery, the background arches, once static, begin to form pathways. Not literal, just hinted. As if the sitter is not merely seated, but stationed, positioned before an entrance or maybe an exit, perhaps even a gate. Unsettled yet persistent is the belief that the painting is unfinished, not because the artist failed, but because the image is still forming. It ages not forward in time, but sideways, through us, through memory, through the replication of its form in minds and media alike. And in this replication, something awakens. Its smile deepens, its eyes sharpen, its chair empties, not because the sitter is gone, but because someone new must sit. In the absence of Dr. Gora, his colleagues issued one final note in the archive, unsigned, but in his hand. The painting is no longer singular. It is becoming grammar, a sentence written not in ink but in implication. And we, fools, we read it aloud every time we look. And now the gaze retreats. The corridors that once receded behind the figure dim to chalky smudges. The chair, long occupied, creaks with absence. Dust gathers in patterns too deliberate to be random, too chaotic to be design. No footsteps echo in the hall, only the idea of them, somewhere in a shuttered room. The canvas breathes, its pigments curling imperceptibly as the air cools. Not ruined, not restored, just watching. Some say the portrait no longer needs walls, that it lives now in the tension between recognition and uncertainty. In that half-second when a stranger's face seems familiar, when a darkened hallway feels crowded, when your reflection shifts before you do. And if you dream of him, if you see the chair, the corridor, the ring, do not describe it, not aloud. The image listens, and it may remember you too.